Joining us, Iranian-American author and journalist Roya Hakakian and Stephen Cook, who is still with us. Roya, really good to have you. Does anything change in Iran?
Everything has already changed. The power hierarchy has dramatically shifted. And given that we had such vast protests in Iran only a few weeks ago, one can only hope that this will lead to the restart of the protests and a sense of moderation on the part of the leadership, the recognition that the hardline positions of death to Israel and death to America will bring them more misery and more attacks.
What do the Iranian people want? I've seen celebrations in the street across Iran. I've also seen mourners by the tens of thousands. I've been listening to interviews with folks that range from this is our moment to folks that say, no, the Ayatollah was beloved, comparing him to Gandhi within the country. Can you give me a sense, which I found surprising, but the guy was adamant, of what the Iranian people want?
Look, Iran witnessed the greatest, most widespread protests since 1979, only 6 weeks ago. And these protesters came under the most brutal attack in the history of modern Iran. The massacre that took place in Iran 7 weeks ago, in the aftermath of January 8th and 9th, it can only be compared with the worst massacres in Europe or throughout the world. In Srebrenica, in Bosnia, 8,000 were killed in a matter of several months. In Iran, already, we know that number stands already at 8,000 for only 3 or 4 days. So, of course, the people of Iran are at their wits' end. The value of the Iranian rial has fallen to 99% of what it was in 1979. Inflation rates are over 80%. So if the streets were a little less violent, if the reaction of the IRGC and the riot police were somewhat more, or I should say less violent than they had been, we would have seen more people by the millions take to the streets. But the reaction was so brutal that it just prevented the furthering of these protests and demonstrations.
So there is no internet right now in Iran. There are checkpoints. There's reports of anti-government or organized anti-U.S. protests at various universities in an attempt by the regime to try to limit or to smother any uprising that may result in this. If the United States was working behind the scenes to try to effect real change for the Iranian people, Stephen, what would they be doing?
Well, certainly the United States would be doing the kinds of things like helping them get their message out and communicate with each other through Starlink, which they did during the height of the protests that Roya is talking about. They would be broadcasting into Iran from our own Persian language services, which the Trump administration has throttled. But I think Roya makes a very, very good point. The regime can manufacture support for itself. There still are people who support the regime. But it strikes me that given those protests in December and January, which were just a recent manifestation of a revolt against this regime that's been going on since at least 2009, that given the opportunity, these people would come out into the streets. So let's keep in mind that there are estimates that the Iranian regime killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 people in a very short period of time, a matter of days in Iran. If we believe numbers coming out of Gaza, that's almost half of what people are saying people were killed in Gaza over the course of 2 years of war. This is extraordinarily brutal. And the Iranians wrote the book about this. They advised Bashar al-Assad to use overwhelming force to frighten and cow protesters who wanted a different kind of government in Syria. And they are doing that once again. I think that the United States and Israel are hoping as they weaken those instruments of repression, then all those people who are out in the streets and more will come out this time.
They've also asked people within the Revolutionary Guard to put down their weapons. Roya, is there a chance that that happens within the Guard? Is there a divided opinion about the regime within the Guard?
There has to be. It's very hard to say, but there has to be. Look, the Supreme Leader, who for 40 years had said, America can't do a damn thing, just saw, the nation just saw that America did more than a damn thing. And so they must be asking themselves whether it's wise to continue on the path that they have been for so many years. And I think, one of the very important mentions that have gone on in the past few weeks, both by the Iranian opposition and by the U.S. administration, has been that they will provide immunity to those who will put down their arms. And I think the desire to do that, especially thinking that they will not be harmed or killed, will only grow.
All right, Roya Akakian, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And Stephen Cook, thank you for sticking around for the hour. I appreciate it.